I was standing at my kitchen counter when the message came through. I remember that part clearly because my hands were full, wrapping paper spread out like a cheap tablecloth. Tape stuck to my thumb. The corner of a box refused to fold clean, no matter how many times I pressed it down. The kind of small irritation that usually keeps your mind busy enough not to wander. Then my phone buzzed. I wiped my hands on my jeans before picking it up. Didn't even look at the name at first. Just assumed it was another work call, or maybe my son checking in from wherever he'd landed this week. For words, before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. Please don't come for New Year's. No explanation. No follow-up. Just that. I read it again, slower this time, like maybe I'd misunderstood. Like maybe the words would rearrange themselves into something softer if I gave them a chance. They didn't. My daughter, Elaine, my only daughter, telling me not to come. I stood there longer than I cared to admit, phone in my hand, tape dangling uselessly from the dispenser. I could feel that familiar tightening in my chest, the one that comes when something lands heavy but quiet. Not anger, not yet. Something closer to being dismissed. Like when someone talks over you mid-sentence and keeps going as if you were never there. I set the phone face down on the counter, finished wrapping the gift, because that's what I've always done when something goes wrong. You keep moving. You finish the job in front of you. You don't make a scene out of hurt, especially not at your own kitchen table. But that message stayed with me. Follow me around the house. Sat in the corners like a draft I couldn't seal. Elaine wasn't just asking me to skip a party. She was telling me I didn't belong. And what she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know, was that her younger brother had been quietly working on something for months. Something that was about to turn that carefully curated New Year's Eve into the most uncomfortable family gathering any of them had ever attended. But I'm getting ahead of myself. This is the story of how being underestimated for nearly 5 decades became my greatest advantage, and why the person you're most embarrassed by is sometimes the one quietly holding up the entire structure beneath your feet. To understand why those 4 words cut so deep, you need to understand how my daughter sees me. 2 weeks before that message, Elaine had invited me to dinner at a place called Harborcrest Club. Private, waterfront, the kind of restaurant where the parking lot has more imported cars than a luxury dealership. Her husband, Richard, had mentioned casually, like it was nothing, that dinner there usually ran about $400 a person. I showed up in my cleanest work shirt, pressed it myself that morning. Dark denim, no stains, no frays, boots polished just enough to look intentional without pretending to be something they weren't. The host took one look at me and smiled in a way that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Delivery entrance is around back, sir." Elaine's face changed colors so fast, I thought she might be ill. "He's with us," she said quickly. Too quickly, like she was apologizing for something she couldn't quite name. We were seated at a table that probably cost more than my first truck. Linen napkins, glassware thin enough to make me nervous holding it. Richard's parents were already there. Old money, the kind that doesn't talk about money because it doesn't need to. His mother wore jewelry that looked delicate but probably carried the weight of a small mortgage. His father spoke slowly, confidently, like time bent around him out of respect. The conversation moved effortlessly: private academies, summer homes, investment strategies. Names of places I'd built but never been invited into. Then Richard's father turned to me. "And what line of work are you in?" "Construction," I said. Just that. The silence that followed felt deliberate. "Oh," his mother replied after a moment, the way someone might acknowledge a bad diagnosis. "How practical." Elaine jumped in immediately. "Dad's mostly retired now," she said. "He keeps busy, but you know how it is." I nodded and smiled, because that's what I've done my whole life. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that those early morning calls weren't social. That the paperwork spread across my kitchen table wasn't a hobby. That there were city officials in more states than she could name who had my number saved under Do Not Miss. She saw the boots. She didn't see the ground they'd walked across. And that night, as I drove home alone, I started to understand something I'd been avoiding for years. My daughter wasn't embarrassed by me because of who I was. She was embarrassed because of what I represented. And that New Year's Eve text? That was just the first crack in something much bigger. The second time I understood exactly how my daughter saw me didn't happen in a fancy restaurant. It happened in her living room. Elaine had invited me to her housewarming party about a month before the New Year's message. New place, suburban development, fresh paint, and debt stacked neatly into a 2-story promise. She'd been proud of that house, and I was proud of her for it. I helped with the down payment. Didn't ask for thanks. Never do. She invited the neighbors, colleagues, Richard's friends from business school, people who measured success in square footage and titles. I arrived early, like I always do. Habit from job sites. Better to be there before things get crowded. I brought a toolbox instead of a bottle of wine because one of the cabinet doors was hanging crooked and I knew it would bother her. She thanked me politely, kissed my cheek. Already distracted, I fixed the cabinet in under 5 minutes. No one noticed. I spent most of the evening near the punch bowl, nodding at conversations I wasn't part of, listening more than speaking. Watching my daughter move through the room like a hostess in a magazine, spread confident, rehearsed, careful. That's when I heard it. I hadn't been eavesdropping. I never do. But sometimes the truth comes looking for you whether you want it or not. Elaine was talking to a woman named Claire, one of her neighbors. Stylish, polite smile, the kind of person who always seems slightly amused by everything. I love my dad, Elaine was saying. I really do. He just doesn't understand this world. Claire nodded sympathetically. He spent his whole life working with his hands, Elaine continued. Literally, dirt, concrete, job sites. It's hard to explain that to people like Richard's family. At least he's kind, Claire offered. Oh, he is, Elaine said quickly. He's wonderful, but he's simple, and I don't want him feeling out of place. Out of place. I felt that one land. Claire leaned closer. Is that why he won't be at your New Year's thing? Elaine hesitated just long enough to answer honestly. Yes, I can't put him through that embarrassment. There it was. Embarrassment. One word. A lifetime collapsed into a single syllable. I set my cup down without finishing it and stepped outside. Sat in my truck for nearly half an hour. Engine off. Hands on the steering wheel. Watching through the front window as my daughter laughed, gestured, played her role. I wondered who she was explaining me to in that moment. Probably telling them I needed air, or that I wasn't feeling well, or that I'd already gone home. Anything but the truth. What Elaine didn't know, what she'd never bothered to ask, was that the men who'd worked beside me for decades never once felt embarrassed by what they did. That mayors called me before sunrise. That there were contracts being negotiated at that very moment worth more than every house on her street combined. She saw my hands. She didn't see what they'd built. The pattern didn't stop there. Last Thanksgiving, she hosted over 20 people. Said space was limited when she called me. I found out later her yoga instructor was there. The mail carrier. Someone's girlfriend from out of town. Christmas morning? We're keeping it small this year, Dad. Just immediate family. Apparently, I didn't qualify. My grandson asked me once why I was never at his mom's parties. I didn't know how to answer that. Because what do you say to a child who's learning far too early that some people are acceptable in public and others are better kept private? That night, back in my kitchen, the New Year's message still sitting unanswered on my phone, I thought about what staying quiet would cost me. It wasn't just another holiday. It was my place in my own family. And there were things Elaine didn't know, things that made her casual dismissal far more expensive than she realized. Paperwork waiting in my lawyer's office. Trust documents. Endowments. Plans for retirement I'd put off for years because there was always more work to do. Decisions that would shape the next generation. I'd spent nearly 5 decades letting people underestimate me. But silence, I realized, had started to teach the wrong lesson. And somewhere between that realization and the unanswered message glowing on my screen, I understood something else. This wasn't about revenge. It was about respect. And respect, once withheld long enough, demands a reckoning. By the time New Year's Eve morning arrived, the message still sat unanswered. Not because I didn't know what to say, because I knew exactly what would happen once I said anything at all. Silence had always been my shield. It let me move through rooms unnoticed. Let people underestimate me without resistance. Let work speak louder than explanation. But that same silence had started to erase me. I stood at my kitchen window, watching the street wake up. Same neighbors I'd known for years. city workers, teachers, a mechanic across the way who waved every morning without fail. Honest people who never once acted ashamed of where they came from. And yet my own daughter thought I needed protecting from her world. I thought about what staying quiet would teach my grandchildren. That success meant distance. That dignity came with a dress code. That the people who built your foundation were best kept out of sight once you climb high enough. That wasn't a lesson I could live with. The financial side of it sat heavier than I expected. Elaine had no idea about the education trust I'd been building for her children. A little over $3 million by now, compounding quietly year after year. Designed to give them choices: college, businesses, homes without ever feeling trapped. She didn't know about the scholarship fund I'd named after her. The Elaine Carter Trades Initiative. Fully funded, permanent. Helping kids from working families learn skills that would never be outsourced or automated away. She didn't know that I was planning to step back next year, or that ownership of what I'd built would need to go somewhere. My business partner already held her share, earned it, deserved it. The rest? Family territory. My son, Daniel, had always asked questions, real ones, about systems, about people, about why things worked the way they did. He listened when I answered, watched more than he spoke. Elaine never asked. She never wondered how a man who drove an old pickup and wore the same boots for years could afford private schools, weddings, emergency loans, and silence around money. If I stayed quiet, I wasn't just avoiding conflict. I was endorsing her assumptions and betraying everyone who had built this thing with me from the ground up. The text message wasn't rejection anymore. It was a line. So that evening, right as dinner time rolled around at her house, I called her. She answered on the fourth ring. "Hey, Dad," she said, distracted. "Can I call you back?" "I got your message," I said. A pause. "Oh, right. Listen, it's not personal." "It sounds personal," she sighed, the way she used to when she was younger and wanted a conversation to end without resolution. "You know how Richard's family is. They're formal, traditional. This is their kind of thing. And I'm not." She hesitated. "Dad, I'm trying to protect you." "From what?" "They can be cruel. They look down on people. I don't want you feeling bad." "Feeling bad about myself? You know what I mean?" "No," I said calmly. "Explain it to me." Another pause. Longer this time. "Fine," she said. "You want me to be honest? You don't fit in. The way you talk, the stories you tell, the clothes you wear. They won't get it. They won't get me. And that embarrasses you," she said quickly. "Not me." I looked around my kitchen. The same table where she'd done homework. The same counter where I'd packed her lunches. "That word," I said quietly. "Embarrasses." She didn't respond. I could hear voices in the background. "Richard." "Someone else." "Elaine," I said. "Those boots you don't like paid for everything you're proud of." "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing," I said. "Forget it." "No," she snapped. "What do you mean by that?" I was quiet for a moment. Then I heard my son's voice in the background. "Who's she talking to?" "Daniel." "Stay out of this," Elaine whispered. "Give me the phone," he said. A little shuffling. Muffled argument. Then, "Dad." "Hey, son. What's going on?" "Your sister thinks I'd be out of place at her party." There was a long silence. "Dad," Daniel said carefully. "Do you want to tell her, or should I?" Elaine's voice cut back in. "Tell me what?" "Nothing," I said. "Just family business." But the moment had shifted. Silence was no longer an option. And the truth, whether I wanted it to or not, was already moving. Daniel didn't call back right away. That worried me more than if he had. My son had inherited my patience, but not my tolerance for unanswered questions. When something didn't sit right with him, he followed it until it either made sense or fell apart. I went back to my routine that night. Cleaned the kitchen, sorted paperwork, made coffee I didn't drink. Outside, the neighborhood was already stringing lights, getting ready to celebrate a clean break from the year behind them. Inside, I felt like I was standing at the edge of something I'd spent my whole life avoiding. The call came 20 minutes later. "Dad," Daniel said, "we need to talk." I figured, "Are you free tomorrow morning?" "I'm always free for you." He exhaled. "Good, because I've been working on something. And after tonight, I don't think I can keep pretending you're just my quiet construction worker father." That made me smile despite myself. We agreed to meet at my place early. He liked mornings too. Said the world told the truth before it got noisy. I barely slept. At a little after 6, Daniel pulled into my driveway. Rental car, coffee in hand, eyes tired but sharp. He sat at my kitchen table, the same one Elaine had grown up at, the same one I'd reviewed blueprints on for decades. I've been investigating a story, he said without preamble. I know, you don't ask questions like that unless you're circling something. He nodded, opened his laptop. Dad, he said quietly, do you know how hard it is to find information on you? I chuckled. That was the point. He turned the screen toward me. Charts, corporate filings, maps dotted with projects across the country. Carter Infrastructure Group, he said, or rather, the network of companies beneath it. Shells, subsidiaries, partnerships. Clean, legal, quiet. I took a sip of coffee. You've built more large-scale infrastructure than any private firm in the last 20 years, he continued. Highways, hospitals, energy facilities. Cities depend on your work, and most people have no idea who you are. I never needed them to. Daniel closed the laptop slowly. For 6 months, he said, I've been following this trail, talking to city planners, competitors, union leaders, disaster response coordinators. Every road leads back to you. I met his eyes. Why now? I asked. Because Forbes moved up publication, he said. The words settled like weight. When? Tonight, he said. Just before midnight. That was when my phone rang. I didn't need to look to know who it was. My business partner. Hold on, I told Daniel. I answered. Walter, she said. We got a situation. How bad? They loved the story. Too much. They're pushing it live tonight. Full profile. Net worth estimate north of $1.5 billion. Philanthropy section is massive. Daniel's head snapped up. You sure you want this? She asked. Once it's out, there's no putting it back. I looked at my son, thought about my daughter, my grandchildren. They should have asked questions a long time ago, I said. I hung up. Daniel stared at me like he was seeing me for the first time. Dad, he said slowly, Elaine has no idea, does she? None. And tonight, he said, voice barely above a whisper, the entire world is going to find out. I nodded. There was a knock at the door. Daniel frowned. Expecting someone? Maybe, I said. When I opened it, a man in a tailored coat stood on my porch. Calm, professional. Mr. Carter, he said, I'm with your legal team. Papers are ready whenever you are. Daniel looked between us. What papers? I stepped aside and let the man in. The kind, I said, that decide what happens next. And for the first time, I felt the weight of what silence had been holding back. New Year's Eve arrived the way it always does. Too loud for people who regret the year behind them. Too hopeful for people who believe a date can fix what honesty never did. Elaine's party was being held at Richard's parents' estate. I knew that much. 8,000 square feet of inherited confidence tucked behind iron gates and trimmed hedges. The kind of place where the house had a name, not an address. I wasn't invited. Daniel was. He called me from his car just after 7. I'm outside, he said. Valet parking. Ice sculptures. Tuxedos everywhere. She nervous? I asked. He paused. Yeah, she keeps checking her phone. She should. You sure about this, Dad? I leaned back in my chair and looked around my living room. Same furniture I'd had for years. Same clock ticking steadily on the wall. Same quiet dignity. Some lessons, I said, can't be taught gently. The article was scheduled to go live at 11:45. Daniel stayed in his car for a while, watching people arrive, describing the scene like a reporter because that's what he was even now. Richard's mother looks expectant, he said, like she's waiting for someone. That's interesting. She asked about you earlier, he added. Elaine said you couldn't make it. And she looked disappointed. That surprised me more than it should have. By 9, my phone rang. Elaine. Her voice was different this time. Tight. Careful. Dad, she said. I need to talk to you. I'm listening. I made a mistake. What kind? About tonight. About everything. I checked the clock. 9:17. You want me to come? I asked. Yes, she said quickly. Please. You sure I won't embarrass you? A pause. Then a breath. I was wrong, she said. I was scared. I stood there for a long moment. All right, I said finally. I'll come. An hour later, I stood in a marble foyer that echoed with laughter and champagne flutes, wearing the same suit I'd bought for Elaine's wedding years earlier. Still fit, still mine. Elaine met me at the door. For just a second, she looked like the little girl who used to run to me after school. "I'm glad you're here," she whispered. So was I. And somewhere in that house, unseen, the clock kept moving toward 11:45. The house had a sound to it. Not music, though. There was plenty of that, but a constant low murmur of confidence. Laughter that assumed it belonged. Conversations that never lowered their voices because no one in that room had ever worried about being overheard. Elaine guided me through clusters of people dressed like they'd stepped out of catalog pages. Jewelry caught the light. Suits fit too perfectly to be accidental. Richard appeared at her side, stiff smile in place. "Mr. Carter," he said. "Welcome. Thank you for having me. Can I get you a drink?" he asked. "Wine? Whiskey? Beer's fine." His smile flickered. "Of course." Elaine led me toward his parents. "Mom, Dad," she said, "this is my father." Richard's mother turned toward me first. She was smaller than I expected. "Come." Eyes sharp but kind. "Mr. Carter," she said, "I've heard so much about you. All good things, I hope." She smiled. "Only the important ones." We talked. About the weather. About the city. About how the place had grown. Easy conversation. Respectful. Her husband joined us, silver-haired and assured. "So," he said, "Elaine tells us you work in construction." "I do." "What sort?" "Mostly infrastructure. Commercial. Public projects." He nodded. "That's real work. My grandfather started in manufacturing. Built everything from nothing." "That generation knew something," I said. "About value." Elaine watched quietly. For once, she didn't redirect the conversation. Then Daniel appeared beside me. "Dad," he said. "Good timing." I checked my watch. 11:37. "Ladies and gentlemen," someone near the fireplace muttered, staring at his phone. "You need to see this." Another phone chimed. Then another. The sound spread like a ripple. Elaine glanced down at her screen. Her face changed. "Dad," she whispered. "There's an article here. Forbes." Richard's father cleared his throat, reading. "Carter Infrastructure Group," he said slowly. "Largest private builder of public works in the country. Net worth estimated at over $1.5 billion. The room went silent. "That's about right," I said. Elaine looked up at me, eyes wide. "This says you employ over 20,000 people. Closer to 22 now." Phones were everywhere now. People whispering, reading, rereading. "It says you fund disaster rebuilding," someone said. "Education programs." Daniel stepped forward. "Dad doesn't just build buildings," he said calmly. "He builds systems." Quietly. Richard's father looked at me again. "Different now. You built our financial tower downtown," he said. "Finished early. Under budget." The weight of the room shifted. Elaine's phone trembled in her hand. "You never told me," she said. "You never asked." Her eyes filled. "I was embarrassed," she whispered. "I know," I said gently. "That's why this matters." The clock struck midnight. No cheers. No countdown. Just understanding. The room never really recovered. It tried briefly, out of habit more than intention. Someone turned the volume knob halfway up again, then down, then off, as if testing whether sound alone could restore what had been lost. It couldn't. The air had changed density. What had once been buoyant voices overlapping, laughter spilling freely now, felt weighted, resistant. It wasn't just that the music stopped early or that champagne glasses went unfinished. Those were symptoms, not causes. It was the subtle rearrangement of bodies, the way people shifted their weight from one foot to the other as if the floor itself had become unreliable. Couples who had arrived together drifted apart slightly, enough to create space for whispered recalculations. Friends leaned closer, their heads nearly touching, as though proximity could shield them from association. Midnight arrived unnoticed. Someone glanced at their watch, startled, and murmured, "Happy New Year," out of obligation. A few others echoed it, the phrase traveling weakly across the room before collapsing under its own irrelevance. No countdown, no cheer. The year turned quietly, almost apologetically, like a door closing somewhere in the distance. Laughter returned in fragments short, brittle sounds that didn't travel far. They broke off too quickly, as if the speakers didn't trust themselves to finish them. People smiled with their mouths, but not their eyes. The eyes were busy elsewhere, tracking reactions, scanning faces, cataloging alliances. They sipped drinks they no longer wanted, grimacing slightly at the taste, as if it had changed. Some stared too long at their phones, pretending to check messages they weren't reading. Others avoided mirrors altogether, instinctively wary of seeing themselves reflected in a room where the rules had just shifted. Conversations restarted, but they were thinner now. Careful, stripped of ease. No one wanted to be overheard saying the wrong thing, not after everything had just changed. Statements became questions. Opinions softened into neutrality. Names were avoided. Everyone was recalibrating, trying to figure out who they had been standing next to for the last hour, trying to decide whether they had misjudged me, or her, or themselves, trying to determine what the truth required of them now, and how much of it they were willing to carry. I felt none of the satisfaction people imagine comes with moments like that. No rush of vindication. No cinematic sense of triumph. No internal monologue declaring justice served. Just tiredness. The kind that settles in your bones, heavier than exhaustion, born not of effort but of endurance. The tiredness of having carried something alone for too long, of having made room for other people's comfort at the expense of your own clarity. There is a myth that truth-telling is exhilarating, that once the secret is out, you feel lighter, freer, somehow elevated. That myth is usually told by people who didn't have much to lose. The truth doesn't always lift you. Sometimes it just finally lets you sit down. Elaine stood very still beside me, her phone dark in her hand. She wasn't scrolling anymore. Wasn't watching the wave crest and break across social media. Wasn't tracking engagement or reach or sentiment. She didn't need to. She knew already. The truth had escaped the room, multiplied, found its audience. Screens everywhere carried pieces of it, now clipped videos, cropped photos, half-remembered quotes, already being sharpened into certainty. There was nothing left to monitor. Her shoulders were stiff, her chin lifted just a fraction too high. A posture she had learned somewhere along the way, part defense, part performance. It was the posture of someone accustomed to being looked at, evaluated, approved of. The posture of someone trained to appear unbothered, even when the ground beneath them had shifted. I remembered when that posture wasn't instinctive, when she used to slump without self-consciousness, curl up on couches, sprawl on floors with books half open and snacks forgotten. That ease had been replaced by something precise, something practiced. Richard hovered nearby, uncertain where to place himself. He kept taking a step toward Elaine and then stopping, as if crossing some invisible line might make things worse. His hands hovered uselessly at his sides before finding his pockets, then emerging again. He looked like a man suddenly aware that the script he'd memorized no longer applied. His parents had retreated to a quiet corner, speaking in low voices. Their posture was different now, less assured, more alert. The confidence of hosts had drained from them, replaced by the watchfulness of people reassessing their position in a room that no longer deferred to them. They weren't angry. Not exactly. They were unsettled, which, for people accustomed to certainty, can feel much worse. Daniel leaned close to me, careful not to draw attention. "It's everywhere," he murmured. "Trending already." I nodded. Of course it was. The truth always moves faster than the lie once it's free. Lies depend on maintenance, on repetition, on agreement, on silence. The truth needs none of that. It moves because people move it, because recognition travels instinctively, like a signal passed hand to hand. "Dad," Elaine said softly, "can we talk?" Her voice cracked on the last word, though she tried to hide it. She didn't look at me when she said it. She didn't have to. I nodded and followed her without comment. We passed through a narrow hallway where coats hung and used, and the lighting dimmed. The sounds of the party dulled behind us, as if muffled by distance or water. We stepped into a side room. It was quieter there, intentionally so, the kind of quiet curated for reflection rather than comfort. Bookshelves lined the walls, leather-bound volumes, chosen more for how they looked than what they contained. Titles embossed in gold, spines uncracked, histories and philosophies arranged as decor. A large window overlooked the grounds, where the lights cast long, pale reflections on the grass. Beyond that darkness, trees reduced to silhouettes. The night indifferent to what had just happened inside. She stopped a few feet in, hands clasped in front of her, eyes on the floor. She didn't speak at first. She just stood there, staring at the carpet, the same way she used to when she was younger and knew she'd gone too far. That familiar posture hit me harder than I expected. It collapsed years into seconds. All the versions of her I had known, child, adolescent, adult, stacked suddenly in the same space. "I didn't know," she said finally. Her voice was small, not weak, just unguarded. "That's true," I said. The words weren't absolution. They were acknowledgement. And I didn't ask. "That's also true." She nodded slightly, as if hearing the shape of the problem out loud made it impossible to ignore. The silence stretched between us. Not hostile, heavy, dense with all the things neither of us had said before. Tears welled in her eyes, but they didn't spill over right away. They gathered there, bright and stubborn, held back by pride or fear or both. She blinked rapidly, as if irritation could explain them away. "I was ashamed," she said. The word landed cleanly. No qualifiers, no excuses. "Of what people would think," she continued. "Of how you looked compared to them." She swallowed hard, the muscle in her throat working. "I thought I was protecting you." "You were protecting an image," I said gently. "Not me." The words weren't sharp. It didn't need to be. Truth has weight on its own. It doesn't require emphasis. She nodded, once a small, decisive movement. The kind people make when they know the argument is already over. "I made my life smaller, trying to fit into theirs," she whispered. That was the sentence that finally broke her composure. The tears came then, quiet and untheatrical. No sobbing, no collapse, just grief finding its way out through the only available opening. She turned slightly away, as if embarrassed by the display, even now. "That's what shame does," I said. "It convinces you that shrinking is safer than standing." Outside the room, the party continued to unravel. I could hear it in the shifting sounds, the clink of glasses being set down more carefully than necessary, the scrape of chairs moving closer together or farther apart. Voices dropped when someone new approached, then rose again cautiously once they passed. Phones buzzed intermittently, a mechanical chorus of interruption. Each vibration another reminder that the moment no longer belonged solely to those in the room. People were searching my name, her name, digging through old photos, old posts, old assumptions, patching together narratives to replace the one that had just collapsed. The human mind hates a vacuum. It rushes to fill it, often before understanding arrives. "Dad," she said, wiping her eyes with the heel of her hand, "what happens now?" I looked at her, really looked, not at the version shaped by boardrooms and branding, by metrics and perception. Not at the polished professional who knew how to command attention without revealing too much, but at the girl I had once carried on my shoulders, the teenager who used to argue with me about curfews and fairness, the woman standing in front of me now, stripped of her armor and unsure what to replace it with. "This isn't about punishment," I said. "It's about what you choose next." She nodded slowly, absorbing that, letting it settle somewhere deeper than strategy. "I lost 3 clients already," she admitted. "People pulled out the moment they realized I'd been embarrassed of you." The words landed harder than she expected. I could tell by the way she flinched after saying them, as if she wanted to reach out and pull them back, to spare me that knowledge. That stung more than I expected, not because of the clients, not even because of the embarrassment, but because it revealed the cost she had been willing to pay quietly, incrementally for acceptance. "I never wanted that," I said. "I know," she replied quickly. "I know, but maybe I needed it." She looked up at me then, really looked. Her eyes searched my face for something, permission perhaps, or forgiveness, or confirmation that losing something external didn't mean losing everything. We stood there a moment longer, neither of us quite ready to move on, both aware that whatever came next would be different, that some doors once closed, don't reopen, and that some losses, once named, stop being abstract. Then there was a soft knock at the door. Richard stepped in without waiting for an answer, his expression careful, almost rehearsed. He stood just inside the threshold, as if unsure whether he belonged in the room at all. "I owe you an apology," he said to me, "for my assumptions." "Apologies don't change much," I replied. "Actions do." He nodded. He didn't argue. He didn't qualify or defend. That counted for something. Whether it would count for enough remained to be seen. By the time we returned to the main room, the party had thinned. Some guests had left quietly, without goodbyes, slipping out like witnesses who had decided they'd seen enough. Others lingered, unsure whether departure would look like judgment or cowardice. The music was off now. No one bothered to turn it back on. Silence, once avoided, had become unavoidable. What remained was understanding and discomfort. People met my eyes differently, some with curiosity, some with guilt, some with something like respect, though it was too early to tell if that would last. Respect born of revelation can be fragile, easily replaced by convenience. Elaine moved through the room like someone learning how to inhabit her body again. She spoke less, listened more. When someone offered a polite platitude and sure it will all blow over, people are so sensitive these days, she didn't rush to smooth it over. She didn't rescue them from their own discomfort. She let the silence sit, let them feel it. And I realized then that the truth hadn't just changed how they saw her. It had changed how she saw herself, which is how real change usually starts. The morning after was quieter than Elaine expected. Not peaceful, just empty in a way that made noise feel intrusive. Her phone lay face down on the kitchen counter, untouched. Not because it wasn't vibrating, because she wasn't ready to look. She made coffee she didn't finish. Stood at the window longer than necessary. The city looked unchanged, which felt almost offensive. Cars moved. People walked dogs. A neighbor laughed on a balcony. The world, it seemed, had not noticed that her carefully constructed life had fractured the night before. When she finally turned the phone over, she didn't scroll. She opened her email first. That felt safer. Emails were slower, more deliberate, less cruel than comment sections. 3 more messages had come in overnight. 2 were polite withdrawals, carefully worded, regretful in tone. After consideration, given recent developments not aligned at this time. The 3rd said nothing directly, only that a meeting scheduled for next week was being postponed indefinitely. Indefinitely was the word that lingered. She closed the inbox without replying. There would be time for that later, or maybe there wouldn't. She didn't know yet. What unsettled her most wasn't the loss itself. It was how unsurprised she felt. Somewhere, buried under years of accommodation, she had known this was the price. She had just assumed she could keep deferring payment. The truth doesn't do payment plans. By midday, the messages shifted, not from clients, those slowed quickly, but from colleagues. Acquaintances, people she hadn't spoken to in years. Some were supportive in the abstract. Others were careful to sound neutral, which was its own kind of answer. A few said nothing at all. Silence, she learned quickly, was not empty. It was communicative. It said, "I'm watching. I'm waiting to see how this lands before I decide where to stand." Richard called twice. She didn't answer either time. Not because she didn't care, because she didn't yet know what caring would require of her. Because she was afraid he would ask for reassurance she could no longer give. When he finally came over that evening, he stood in her kitchen the way he had stood in the side room the night before, present, but not anchored. He spoke about logistics first, about how strange the party had ended, about his parents' concern, about how quickly people online moved on to speculation. He didn't say "I'm sorry" again. He had already done that. Repeating it would have been easier than changing. "What happens now?" he asked. She recognized the question. She had asked it herself, only hours earlier, in a different room, to a different man. "I don't know," she said honestly. That was new for her, not knowing, saying so without apology. Over the next weeks, the cost of the truth revealed itself in increments. It showed up in invitations that never came, in panels she was no longer asked to sit on, in conversations that stopped just a beat too early when she entered the room. No one confronted her. No one accused. They didn't need to. Discomfort did the work quietly. Some clients stayed. Fewer than she'd hoped. More than she'd feared. They didn't congratulate her for her courage. They simply continued. Work became smaller, but clearer. Less performative. Less exhausting. She noticed something else too. The people who stayed never asked her to explain her father. They didn't need context, or justification, or reassurance that she was still acceptable. That absence of demand felt almost unfamiliar. Her relationship with him shifted in subtler ways. They spoke more often now, but said less. There was no longer anything to manage between them, no version of herself to present or protect. She told him about the losses without dramatizing them. He listened without trying to fix them. Sometimes that hurt more than advice would have. Richard struggled. Not dramatically, not cruelly, but visibly. His world had been built on smooth transitions, on belonging without friction. Being adjacent to discomfort unsettled him. He began to frame his concerns as practicalities. Maybe this will blow over. Maybe it's just a cycle. Maybe you don't need to lead with it. She heard the subtext even when he didn't. Maybe you could still make this easier. One night, after a long pause neither of them filled, she said, "I can't pretend anymore." He nodded, but nodding is not the same as staying. When he left that night, they didn't call it anything. They didn't need to. Some endings don't announce themselves. They simply stop moving forward. What surprised Elaine most was not how much she lost. It was how much effort she recovered. Without the constant vigilance, without checking how every detail of her life might read to someone else, she slept better, thought more slowly, spoke more carefully, not because she was afraid of missteps, but because she was no longer rushing to align. Her father noticed before she did. "You're quieter," he said once. "Am I?" "Yes," he replied, "but not smaller." That distinction mattered. Months later, the story had moved on. The internet always does. What lingered was not outrage, but memory faint, selective, distorted. Elaine was no longer a topic. She was a reference point, a caution, a footnote. She learned to live with that. The truth had not made her powerful. It had made her precise. Her life was different now, narrower in some ways, more exposed in others. But it was hers fully without edits. And though the cost had been real and ongoing, it was no longer compounded by pretense. That, she realized, was the part no one warned you about. The truth keeps costing you, but it stops charging interest. By morning, the world knew my name. I didn't. I turned my phone off before sunrise and went for a walk instead. Same route I'd taken for years. Past the park where I used to push Elaine on the swings. Past the corner store where the owner still asked about my back. Past the quiet places where life had always made sense. Daniel called later that afternoon. "You need to see this," he said. "I don't," I replied. "Dad," he insisted, "this isn't about fame. It's about impact." I came by his office anyway. Screens everywhere. Headlines scrolling. Commentary from people who had never heard of me before yesterday, but suddenly had strong opinions. Working people celebrated. Office workers argued. Business analysts speculated. And Elaine, she's getting hit hard, Daniel said carefully. How hard? Her old social media posts are resurfacing. Screenshots. Commentary. Some people are being cruel. That sat wrong with me. I never wanted her destroyed, I said. "I know," he replied, "but lessons rarely come gently." We sat in silence for a moment. "Dad," Daniel said finally, "the foundation inbox is overflowing. Thousands of messages, applications, stories." "Good," I said. "That means it matters." "And the business?" he asked. "Still standing," I said. "Still needs direction." That evening, Elaine came to my house. She looked smaller somehow. Not broken, just stripped of pretense. "I lost the Morrison account," she said quietly. "They said they couldn't trust someone ashamed of her own family." I winced. "I deserve that," she added quickly. "I know I did." She sat at my kitchen table, the same one, where she'd once done homework while I reviewed contracts. "I don't want to live like that anymore," she said. "Chasing approval, editing people out." I studied her. "What do you want instead?" "To understand," she said. "What you built. How? Why?" "That's not glamorous," I warned. "I'm done with glamorous." I leaned back. "There are conditions," I said. She nodded. "I figured." If you want any part of what comes next, I continued, you start where everyone else starts. Early mornings. Hard hats. No titles. She swallowed. I can do that. Maybe, I said. But wanting isn't enough. Daniel spoke up. Dad's right. Legacy without effort is just entitlement with better branding. Elaine smiled weakly. So, she asked, what happens now? I looked at both my children. Now, I said, we decide what this thing is for. Elaine showed up the following Monday at 5:45 in the morning. Not 5:46. Not close enough. 5:45. The sky was still undecided about whether it wanted to be night or day. That thin blue-gray hour where the world feels unfinished, like someone paused creation mid-thought. The air had teeth in it sharp, honest cold that slid under jackets and reminded you how little insulation comfort really has. She stood in my driveway like she'd been there a while. Borrowed steel-toed boots a half size too big. Thick socks folded down to make them work. Hair pulled back into a plain tie. Not styled, not strategic, just contained. No makeup, no jewelry, no signals, just readiness. She held a thermos in both hands, fingers wrapped around it like it was the only warm thing she trusted. I stepped out, coffee in hand, and let the moment sit for half a beat longer than necessary. Timing matters. Silence, too. You're early, I said. She didn't smile, didn't apologize, didn't over-explain. I didn't want to be late. That answer mattered more than she knew. That's a good instinct, I said. Won't be the last test. She nodded once. Not eager, not defensive, just acknowledging reality. I handed her the hard hat. It was plain, scuffed, no decals, no stickers, no name written inside. It had been worn by at least a dozen people before her, some long gone, some still on payroll, some who didn't make it through their first winter. You're not my daughter out there, I said, looking her in the eye. You're a trainee. She didn't hesitate. Understood. That too mattered. The site was already alive when we arrived. Engines idling low, radios murmuring weather reports and early chatter. The smell of diesel and wet earth mixing into something you don't forget once it gets into your system. The foreman was Luis. 40 years in the field. Not a resumed number 40 years that showed up in his posture. The way he leaned without looking like he was leaning. The way his eyes moved before his head did. His hands looked like braided rope, thick and scarred, the kind of hands that told stories without asking permission. He didn't smile when I introduced her. This is Elaine, I said. She's starting at the bottom. He looked at her boots first, then the hard hat, then her face. Morning, he said. Neutral, flat, honest. Morning, she replied. Treat her like anyone else. I added. I will, he said, and he meant it. That was the best thing I could have asked for. The first week was safety. Not the kind you learn from laminated charts or corporate videos with soft voices and stage concern. This was safety taught by people who'd watch consequences unfold in real time. Stories instead of slides. A finger lost because gloves were just this once forgotten. A back ruined because someone lifted with pride instead of patience. A moment of distraction that turned into a lifetime of reminders. Elaine listened more than she spoke. That alone set her apart. Most new trainees, especially the ones who come from money or college or a sense of having already made it, talk too much. They fill silence with theory. They ask questions that prove intelligence instead of questions that prevent mistakes. Elaine's questions mattered. Why does that cord run that way instead of straight? How do you know when the ground's compacted enough? What do you do if someone senior tells you to skip a step? She didn't ask to challenge. She asked to understand. By the third day, her hands were blistered. By the fifth, she stopped noticing. There's a moment when pain shifts from novelty to background noise. When your body stops protesting and starts adapting. You don't celebrate it. You don't announce it. You just keep working. People tested her. Not cruelly. Not with traps or hazing. Just honestly. The way crews always do. The way they have to. Someone handed her a task without explanation to see if she'd freeze or ask. Someone corrected her sharply to see if she'd bristle. Someone ignored her entirely to see if she'd disappear. She didn't quit. She didn't complain. She didn't perform resilience like it was a personality trait. She just showed up again the next morning. 5:45. By the second week, she'd learned the rhythm, when to move fast, when to slow down, when to stay out of the way. She learned that strength isn't just lifting, it's knowing when not to. That speed without accuracy creates more work than it saves. That the loudest voice on a site is rarely the most experienced. She also learned how invisible good work can be. No applause for correctly set rebar. No praise for a clean site at the end of a long day. No acknowledgement when everything goes right. Only notice when it doesn't. That was new for her. She'd grown up in environments where effort was tracked, graded, rewarded, where feedback came quickly and often, whether it was deserved or not, where intention counted almost as much as outcome. The site didn't care about intention. It cared about results. On the 9th day, a guy named Marco tested her patience. He wasn't mean. He wasn't kind. He was tired. "Bring me the coupler," he said, without looking up. She brought the wrong one. He sighed, not dramatically, just enough to register, and said, "No, the other one." She felt the heat rise in her neck. Not anger, embarrassment, the kind that tempts you to explain yourself into relevance. She didn't. She went back, got the right one, handed it over. "Thanks," he said, already moving on. That was it. No lesson spelled out. No reconciliation scene. Just competence slowly replacing uncertainty. The third week tested her endurance. Longer days, less novelty, muscles sore in places she didn't know had names. The weather turned unpredictable, cold mornings, sharp sun by noon, wind that cut through layers like it was personal. She learned how to eat fast, how to drink water before thirst made demands, how to sleep deeply and wake anyway. She also learned what it meant to be underestimated. Not openly, not insultingly, subtly. People assumed she'd need help, assumed she'd tap out early, assumed she was just visiting this world. She didn't correct them. She let time do it. One afternoon, I watched from a distance as the crew finished a long pour. Concrete days are unforgiving once you start. You don't stop because you're tired. Cleanup stretches long past the point where energy is a choice. The horn blew. People started packing up. Elaine stayed. No one asked her to. No one told her to. She just saw the work and did it. Sweeping slurry, organizing tools, stacking without being told how. Luis noticed. So did I. He didn't say anything to her that day. But the next morning, he handed her a task without hesitation. No explanation. No double check. Trust offered quietly. A month in, Daniel came by the site. Camera off. Notebook closed. That alone told me he wasn't there to document, he was there to observe. "She's different," he said, watching from the same distance I'd been using. "She's learning," I replied. "What about Jonathan?" he asked. "He lasted 6 weeks," I said. "Long enough to learn respect. Smart enough to know his strengths lie elsewhere." Jonathan had started with similar intentions, but different wiring. He absorbed the environment, appreciated it, and then made a rational decision instead of a romantic one. He ended up running project financing. Better suited, more grounded now, less performative, more useful. Daniel nodded. And Elaine, she keeps showing up. That was the metric. By the 6th week, she'd stopped being new. Not because she knew everything, far from it, but because she'd learned how to learn without drawing attention to herself. She anticipated needs. She corrected mistakes quietly. She absorbed criticism without making it about identity. Dust lived under her nails now. Sunburn traced the back of her neck despite the collar. Her confidence had been stripped of decoration. What remained was real. She laughed less loudly, spoke more precisely, listened with her whole body. She started noticing things she'd never noticed before. The way a crew moves like a single organism when things go wrong. The unspoken hierarchy that has nothing to do with titles. The pride people take in work no one outside the fence will ever see. She learned that dignity isn't granted by position, it's earned by contribution. One evening, after a day that seemed determined to test everyone's patience, she sat beside me on the tailgate of my truck. The site was quiet now. Tools locked away. Engines silent. The smell of dust still clung to the air, but the noise had finally given up. She took a long drink from her thermos. "Cool now. I used to think work like this was something you escaped," she said. I didn't answer right away. "And now?" I asked. Now I see it's something you earn pride from. She didn't say it dramatically. No revelation music. No grand gesture. Just truth, discovered the long way. I nodded. That was the lesson. Not money. Not headlines. Not ambition dressed up as destiny. Work. The kind that humbles you. The kind that doesn't care who you are. The kind that asks, every morning at 5:45, whether you're serious or just curious. Elaine kept answering. And in doing so, she didn't just learn how things are built. She learned who she was when no one was watching. 6 months later, I stood on the observation deck of a 43-story building in downtown Cedar Ridge, watching the final steel beam rise into place. The wind was sharp up there, honest, the kind that cuts through pretension and leaves only what's real. Below us, the city moved the way cities always do, unaware of how much unseen work keeps them standing. This building would become the new headquarters of the Carter Foundation. Not my name on the front, not my face in the lobby, just a mission etched into glass and steel: build what lasts. Elaine stood beside the ceremonial beam, wearing a hard hat with her last name stenciled on the front. Not because I'd ordered it, because the crew had insisted. She'd earned it. She lasted exactly 3 days in those first boots before redesigning them not to look better, but to function better. Identified inefficiencies in our project tracking systems before her second month was up. Stayed late. Asked questions. Listened when the answers weren't flattering. The crews noticed. They always do. Daniel stood a few feet away, filming quietly. Not as a reporter this time, but as a record keeper. The foundation had grown faster than any of us expected. Scholarships in dozens of states. Disaster response teams on standby year-round. Apprenticeships feeding directly into careers. Jonathan had found his place too. Finance. Yes, but finance informed by dirt under the nails. He understood now that numbers meant people. My business partner flew in that morning. She leaned on the railing beside me. You know, she said, most men would have burned this all down out of spite. I never built it to burn, I replied. She smiled. That's why it worked. Elaine approached. Dad, she said, they're ready. I walked to the microphone, looked out at the faces below: workers, architects, city officials, scholarship recipients. People who'd built this alongside me, whether they knew it or not. When I started, I said I had a truck, a set of tools, and a belief that good work didn't need applause. A few nods. Over the years, people mistook quiet for small, humility for weakness, labor for lack of vision. I paused. They were wrong. The beam rose higher, guided into place by hands that knew what they were doing. This foundation, I continued, exists because work matters, because dignity doesn't come from titles, and because legacy isn't what you leave behind, it's what you teach forward. The beam locked into place with a deep, satisfying sound. Applause followed, but it felt distant. Elaine handed me a folder afterward. Inside was a proposal. Affordable housing developments in 12 cities. Built by apprentices. Funded by the foundation. Managed by people who had once been told they didn't belong. It's a closed loop, she explained. We train. We build. We reinvest. I read every page. This is good, I said. This is real. I learned from watching you, she replied. I shook my head gently. No, I said. You learned by becoming yourself. That evening, back at my house, I sat alone at the kitchen table. The same table where this story had begun. My phone buzzed. Messages from people I didn't know. From people who finally saw themselves reflected in a story they'd been told didn't include them. I didn't respond. Instead, I thought about that first message. Those 4 words. Please don't come for New Year's. Funny how something meant to exclude, you can end up opening every door that matters. If there's anything I've learned in nearly 5 decades of building, it's this. The world doesn't fall apart because of arrogance. It falls apart because of forgetting who did the work. If this story spoke to you, tell me where you're watching from. Because every family has a foundation. The only question is whether you're building it quietly or tearing it down without realizing it.